So our index ranks countries based on both what we call the depth and the breadth of their global flows. So depth is about how much of a country's flows happen across borders versus how much happens within the domestic economy. And breadth is about how globally distributed the flows are around the world. Singapore excels at both, but it really excels the most on the depth dimension. Singapore is the country with the largest international flows relative to domestic activity. And we measure that across 4 categories of flows: trade flows, capital flows, information flows, and people flows. On that depth measure, Singapore ranked first for trade, third for capital and information, and fourth for people. So Singapore really excels across the board, particularly in that depth dimension of globalization. So part of it is what we could call the structural factors. So the size of Singapore, its level of economic development, its sophistication, and its geographic location. So those provide a platform. There really isn't another country that has quite the same position for global connectedness. But it's not only those structural factors. If you think about Singapore, really from independence has made globalization a cornerstone of its economic development strategy, embracing everything from industry-specific strategies, which change over time. As Singapore becomes more developed, different industries have been targeted for development, and the development of very efficient port infrastructure, policies that support connectedness. So essentially, I would say Singapore started off with a very favorable set of structural characteristics for globalization, and then built and executed over time a set of policies that really helped to achieve that potential. Well, I'm optimistic that Singapore will continue to be at or near the top of our rankings. The biggest threat, and I think it's not an unusual one across countries, but the biggest threat for a country in Singapore's position, I would say, is the current geopolitical situation. For the moment, while we have separation between the U.S. and China, we don't have a broad split of countries lined up and separating between these two. If we were to see more of that kind of a split, it would really pull against Singapore as a country that is really deeply connected to countries that have very different geopolitical orientations. I think it helps us to remember that there's actually a lot of continuity among the change. People talk, for example, that supply chains are now being driven more by geopolitics than by anything else. Geopolitics has become more important, but supply chains are still driven to a pretty large extent by economics. And you have growth in different parts of the world, and actually that creates more opportunities for trade between distant countries. And so far, we continue to see that pattern of there are more opportunities for long-distance trade, stretching trade out over longer distances. It doesn't mean the geopolitics doesn't matter. It just means that actually the economics continue to drive trade more than the geopolitics do.